Hello, welcome to week 2 of Date Night with Martina, and you'll see I have Hades here. He's got his purr going right now, loving being live and supporting all of you. Panna is on the floor and hopefully she behaves herself. She's my kitten and she's incredibly naughty and mischievous. Yeah, I'm excited to be back here for another date night. It was beautiful to feel how many people tuned in last week and the responses from everybody. So please do say hello in the chat box. If any questions come up for you, please share your questions and I'll either address the questions throughout the night or come back to them at the end. If you have any comments about what I'm speaking about, please pop your comments in. It's beautiful to have this as a co-created experience and to feel the community enjoying and getting something from it. Tonight is one of my favorite topics, and that is relationship to pleasure. I believe our relationship to pleasure is essential for our lives. Whether you're single, whether you're in a relationship, having a healthy relationship to pleasure will change the way you experience the world. So we're going to dive into why pleasure is essential and also how you can start practicing pleasure. Because people often think of pleasure in the big ways like masturbation or making love or, particular massage. But in some ways, pleasure can be as simple as even just starting to caress and stroke your own face and neck. Really simple. But I'll go into techniques for pleasure later on. I just wanted to, put it out there that you can start to reframe pleasure and to know it's about much more than you might think. There are a couple of questions from last week that I wanted to speak to first of all. Peter asked a question about polarity, and I addressed the question in the Facebook Live. But afterwards I had to think about it, and there was some more I wanted to add to it. And then I realized polarity in itself is a really big topic. So I'm going to address polarity. Maybe that'll be next week's topic, because I think polarity needs a whole unfolding and unpacking of its own, because the way we breathe, the way we move our bodies, the way we look at our partner, the way we breathe when we're near our partner, all of those things can change polarity. So watch out for the session on polarity. That'll probably be next week. The other question was, somebody wrote to me privately afterwards and shared how their partner doesn't make their daily practice a priority and kind of leaves their daily practice to last, and then kind of has external excuses for why the practice doesn't get done. The key thing here is that if you're with a partner who doesn't prioritize their daily practice, is that you just need to surrender. You can't make somebody get the importance of a daily practice. You can't make someone commit to their daily practice. The only thing you can do is be inspiring by your own internal commitment and by letting your partner feel the way that you're responding, what's shifting inside of you as a result of your daily practice. If the partner is using excuses, and the excuses don't feel valid or relevant, you could simply say, yeah, that doesn't feel right to me, but if that's what happened for you today, then that's what happened for you. You can perhaps even bring some clarity to saying, something doesn't feel right about what you're saying. without going into a defensive or an accusatory position. Hi Sherry and Paul as well. Lovely to have you both here. Now I can see I've just had a couple of comments pop up that are not showing in the chat feed. So give me a second to just check on my phone. Okay, so some people can't see this. It's Fergus and Jean who are both asking if it's on. So Sherry, are you still there? Is anybody else there? I just want to check and make sure that I'm actually live. The clock is ticking over. So I'm just going to comment here. Yes, on now. Okay, Justine has just reacted to the video. So and there's Fergus Chow from Italia. Okay, awesome. Gail's here. Beautiful. Okay, so I am live. It's all working. Perfect. Yay. Justine says yes. Barbara says she's here. And Fergus says he can see me now. Excellent, excellent. So yeah, if you are somebody whose partner makes excuses about not getting to their practice, you might even find out, is there something else your partner is needing in his or her life right now? Is there a way that they need support, or is there a way that they're feeling unsupported, or is there something on a deeper emotional level that that your partner might need to unpack at the moment in their life, which could be the reason that they're creating excuses. Generally, when we get into the habit of doing a regular practice, there's that natural motivation and inspiration to do it. But it's that first part of getting into it that can feel really sticky and challenging to get into. Jean says hello to you as well, Jean. Anne says she's here, she can see and hear. Greg says he's here as well. Awesome, awesome. So let's do a short breathing practice for the people who are here, and then after the breathing practice we'll move into talking about pleasure in some more detail. So just place one hand on your heart and one hand on the lower belly. And start to take some deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. Breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And as you breathe in, I want you to imagine that as you're breathing in, you're receiving life, sensation, pleasure in through your nose. And as you breathe out, there's a sense of surrendering, of letting go. Breathing in, receiving pleasure, drinking pleasure and sensation into your body. And exhale, surrendering and finding the sweetness in letting go. Breathing in and letting go. Imagining that your breath is like making love, so that with the inhale you're receiving pleasure, love, opening, and as you exhale you're surrendering even more deeply. Deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth, allowing your body to tune in on a deeper level, having your eyes looking down into your belly, allowing a gentle rocking and undulating through the pelvis, through the back, as you breathe in and out. And then just letting go. And if you've just participated in the practice, you can open your eyes, release your hands. And if you feel differently after the breathing practice, just write a comment into the chat box and share how you're feeling in this moment. Peter says hello all. Janine says hi to everyone. So we've still got more people joining us. Really, really lovely to share with you all. So now jumping into pleasure. So first of all, our relationship to pleasure is essential because it's a deeper way to connect with our own bodies. Oftentimes when people experience trauma, shock, pain, have had a lot of grief in their life, it can be that they start to numb out to their connection to their body, and then it's challenging to be able to connect to pleasure. It's challenging to be able to feel sensation in the body. The majority of the one-on-one work that I do with people is or starts from that very place, from the disconnection to the body, because a lot of people don't feel as much as they want to feel. I'll come back to that in a second. It looks like the internet is cutting in and out for a few people. Both Justine and Gail are having issues with the internet. That's a shame. Rick says he feels very soft from the practice. Sherry says relaxed and calm. Fergus says he feels softer. Beautiful. It's nice to know that the practice has an impact. It looks like my internet connection is strong here. So, sorry that people are having struggles with the internet. Perhaps you can watch it later on the replay, or keep bearing with it and see if your connection strengthens at all. So, in the work that I do with people one-on-one, we're often exploring why it is that people have disconnected from their bodies, why people experience numbness, a shutdown, a lack of sensation and feeling. Because when people experience a lack of sensation, a lack of feeling in their body, then they think that they've got to push more and push harder, and, in a self oriented way. When it comes to masturbation, it means that women become more and more vigorous, putting more hard and firm pressure on their clitoris. For men, similarly with masturbation, then when they feel numbness in their body, numbness in their penis, they become very vigorous and forceful in the way they touch and stimulate their penis. But often what I've seen is through being vigorous and forceful and kind of trying to push an outcome, we create further shutdown, further desensitization in our bodies. It's often going the other way, going into more of the fine, subtle and delicate feelings, that we can start to really engage with pleasure in a whole other way. In a partnered connection, if one partner doesn't feel very much, if one partner's a bit numb in their body, or quite often I see that both partners are numb in the body, then the tendency can be that both people start to move harder and faster in the sexual experience to try and make something happen, to try and force an outcome. But then in that, they often fall into the habit of doing each other rather than being with each other. And in that space of doing each other, there'll be lots of performance and goal-oriented action. So the performance and goal-oriented action means that people go into the mode of like, I'll know that this is good if you're having a good time. And so there's this impact of trying to make the other person have an experience. But as soon as we try and make the other person have an experience, then we put undue pressure on the other person, and it often means that their orgasm, their pleasure, their connection to their body just disappears like that. But when we're connected to pleasure in our own body, then let's say, for example, if I'm just touching Rod in a gentle, caressing, supportive way, just caressing down the front of his body. Now I could do that in a way that's just mindless, and I'm just touching, and no connection to my hand, no connection to my breath, my body. There's not going to be any pleasure in that for me or for him. Whereas if I touch the front of his body in a way that even as I touch him, I'm paying attention to my breath, I'm paying attention to the sensations in my hand, I'm paying attention to how his chest feels and responds under my hand, then there's more spaciousness, there's more sensation, there's more room for things to move. And when I'm connected to that in my body, it means that he can be connected to that pleasure and sensation in his body. And it's good to start tuning into it in the really, really simple ways, like how pleasure can be present through this kind of simple touch and caress on your partner's body. It's very common for men and women to become so focused on their partner's body that they disconnect from their own internal world. And if I'm disconnected from my breath, if I'm disconnected from my own internal world, my capacity to tune into my partner becomes more and more limited. Because if let's say I'm touching Rod, we'll go back to the touching his chest example. If I'm sitting there analysing it and going, is he enjoying it? Does that feel good for him? Then I'm here. Nothing is happening here. And there's a sense that I become so focused on him and his experience that it's not possible for my energy to move. So understanding that pleasure starts in our body. Even if we are giving to a partner, pleasure starts here. And the great thing about knowing that pleasure starts here, it means that you're not overly caught up in your partner going, are you feeling anything? Are you feeling anything? What's going on for you? Now, most people don't actually say that out loud, but having watched couples do practices like this together, I see that happen all the time, where the person is waiting for their partner's response without any connection to their own body. When you're connected to your own body and connected to your own pleasure, you will absolutely know what is going on, how your partner's feeling, and whether they're experiencing pleasure. The other great things about pleasure is that it can help our emotions and our feelings to move. If you read my post today, you will have seen that I woke up with a lot of grief and sadness around this current situation that we find ourselves in globally right now. And for me, that grief and sadness, there's a lot of it that is personal because I love getting people together in groups. I love running workshops and retreats, and it's also my main source of income. And right now, I can't do that in the physical world. I can do it here in the online world, but I can't reach out and touch or hug or have that mutual connection with people that happens in physical space. So I'm sad about missing those physical connections. I'm, concerned about my business income, my future. I'm also concerned on a global level at what's happening in our world, because as well as the physical and the health impact, there's a really significant economic impact that's happening. And I also understand that the work I offer may not be a priority for people for a long time if they're impacted economically, because people go back to what's necessary for their survival in these kind of times. So I woke up this morning with a lot of grief and sadness present in my body, and I sat down for my daily practice and I did 25 minutes of meditation, and I was very present and solid in my meditation, but the grief and the sadness wasn't shifting. And then I stood up to dance and had that kind of heaviness in my body of like, oh, I really don't want to dance, and it's not the day for dancing for me, but I know that it's when I don't feel like dancing that it's going to be the most supportive. And so I started dancing and moving my body, and as I was moving, I started to engage in sensual touch, to touch the sides of my body, to touch my breasts, to touch my hips, to just love my body and activate pleasure, activate movement. And as I was doing that, I'm present to the pleasure, I'm present to sensations moving, then the grief started to shift. And then I just went down on my hands and knees and I started wailing and letting out sounds, and there were tears that came, and there was a deep sense of relief that came with the wailing, the tears, the sounding it out, the movement and the expression of that through my body. So, and I didn't get lost in those emotions because I was letting them move through me. I didn't become identified with the grief and the sadness, because as I moved the grief and the sadness, I felt more and more connection and more space inside of my body. And then I could come in to be present to, there's grief here, there's sadness, there's sweetness, there's relief, there's pleasure, there's happiness, there's gratitude, and there's excitement about what comes next. And this is often the challenge for us in our human mind, is that when we have conflicting feelings, like I feel sad and I feel happy, we often struggle to reconcile that we can feel both things at the same time. But by accepting that I can be present to pleasure, I can be present to pain, I can be present to grief, I can be present to sweetness, and all of those things can exist simultaneously, then my body can relax, because those things can move and I'm not trying to pin myself down to just having one experience. And it's often if I try and pin myself down to the one experience that I get myself trapped or stuck or in a sabotage mode, where I become overly identified with my feelings, and 3 weeks later I'm still feeling sad, but I'm still feeling sad because I'm now stuck in that sadness. So I know that's quite a lot around emotional processing. So I know that there's a bit of a delay from when I say it to when you receive it. But I might just allow a moment in case there are any questions around the relationship to moving those emotions and feelings through our body, and the connection to pleasure. If it makes sense to you, perhaps just say, yep, got it, makes sense. Just pop that in the chat box. If you have a question about it, fire away with your question. And I'll just have a sip of my cup of tea, which actually needs a little jiggle and a stir. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions, or perhaps the video's lagging a little bit more than I think. Barb says, yep, totally, she gets it. Tony says, well expressed around moving through emotions. Awesome. So people are understanding that. Awesome. Greg says, perfect sense. Excellent. So pleasure can be that catalyst to help the emotions move through our bodies. Pleasure is also a way in which we connect much more deeply to sensation and feeling in our body. We have a few more comments coming in. Justine says, movement is definitely the gateway to pleasure for me. Gail says, totally makes sense. And Jean says, it's a relief to hear that there's space for multiple emotions to be felt simultaneously. Fergus says, tea like energy, a jiggle and a stir. Perfect. Awesome. Loving hearing from you all and feeling your responses. And I love what you say, Jean, about there being space for multiple emotions to be felt simultaneously, because I do think that that is something that is overlooked, and it is something that often causes us to get stuck in our head because we can't or we don't know how to allow space for the multiple feeling experiences. Barb says, when feelings have consumed, very hard to get out. Yes, that is true. And that's where movement and expression of those feelings through the body can really help. But when the emotion feels very stuck and very dense, often moving is the last thing we want to do. But it can be that you go for a run or do a brisk walk or put on some really loud, chaotic music and just go wild for a bit to really release and have a big shift of some of those denser emotions. Monica says it makes a lot of sense because she's experiencing herself as stuck at the moment. So do get into some movement. It helps with the connection to the body, but also it can then help to activate pleasure. It's like pleasure can be both the catalyst for us moving sensation and emotion in the body, but also then moving that sensation and emotion in the body will take us much more deeply into pleasure. I often find that when people are avoiding self-pleasure, when they're avoiding connecting intimately with their partner, it'll be because they're feeling so stuck and so dense in their emotional state that they're frightened that intimacy is going to activate those emotions. When I say frightened, it's an unconscious fear. Most of the time, people don't know that they're frightened that intimacy will cause feelings to move, but there's something internally that lets a person know if they drop into their body, if they start to feel things in their body because they're being intimately engaged either with self or with a partner, then emotions will start to move. And then as those emotions start to move, it then requires some being present to processing it through. The other thing I wanted to mention around our relationship to pleasure and connecting intimately with a partner, there can be a tendency, particularly for women, to wait until they feel sexy to connect sexually. And what that then means, if you wait till you feel sexy, it could be a long, long time before you actually connect intimately again with your partner. But if you take responsibility for feeling sexy, and that sexy is, it's not something you do for somebody else. It's not something you do to please somebody else. Sexy is about the feeling you have in your body. Sexy is when you have that sense of aliveness that bursts through you that's like, oh my God, I'm on fire today. I feel so good, so bright, so alive. And then every way that you walk, that you move, that you touch yourself, that you look at your partner, that sexiness is present. Now, you might not have a lot of days where you wake up present to that, but engaging in a self-touch, self-pleasure practice is about you then taking responsibility for activating feelings of sexy. And then through your practice of touch, of self-pleasure, and going, oh, actually, I'm pretty delicious. I feel pretty darn good. Then that feeling of sexy starts to radiate out from your body, and you're not waiting for all of the stars to align, for your partner to say the perfect thing, for yourself to be the perfect weight, for, everything in the universe to align perfectly just so that you can feel sexy. It's one way that we women often delay our own pleasure, delay our connection to our body, and kind of put responsibility for how we feel out there, and perhaps even put out responsibility for how we feel onto our partners, waiting for everything to be perfect before we feel pleasure, before we feel sexiness. Just another comment here. John says, listening to music and even being free of clothes can be such a release of negative energy. So true. Very, very true. So I want to take you all into a little experience of pleasure, and then I'll come back to talking about pleasure in some more detail. So starting with your forearms stretched out in front of you. Actually, step back before your forearm. Let's rub your hands together. Generate some heat, some energy between your hands. And then take your hands apart and feel the energy ball that you've just created between your hands. Take a deep breath. Tune in to the sensations in your hands. And then just release your non-dominant hand and arm. So for me, that's the left hand and arm. I'm just going to keep my right hand in the air, just moving your right hand. Close your eyes, but breathe into your fingertips. Particularly breathing in to your index finger and your middle finger. Start to notice sensations and feelings in the middle finger and the index finger. And then take the middle finger and the index finger and caress your forearm with those two fingertips. And as you caress your forearm with those two fingertips, keeping your eyes closed, but take some deep breaths, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you take those deep breaths, breathe into the forearm, breathe into the fingertips, and just notice what you feel in your body. Notice if there are feelings in your fingertips, feelings in your forearm, feelings through the center of your body. What happens for you as you caress and touch, just lightly, gently touching with those two fingertips? And then perhaps move your touch to touching with the whole hand, so the palm and all four fingers caressing the forearm of the opposite hand. Keeping your breath deep, in through the nose, out through the mouth, breathing into the forearm, breathing into the hand. So there's that sense of simply being with the sensations, simply being with your own body. You can bring the practice to a close and perhaps just make a note in the chat box of how you felt, what you noticed during the practice. Maybe you didn't feel anything, maybe you felt sensation right through your body. For me, I was doing the practice whilst I was guiding you. I was feeling a lot of sensation in my hand that was touching, as well as sensation in the arm that was receiving. But I also had this beautiful sense of warmth, expansion, and openness right through the center of my body, all the way from the upper chest, through my heart, through my belly, and even down into the vagina, feeling a nice, pleasurable, warm buzz just moving right through the body as I was breathing and touching. And so this is what's possible when we really take responsibility for our pleasure, when we tune into our bodies at this deeper layer. We start to feel more and more through the most simple practices. And oftentimes when I talk about self-pleasure, people immediately think it's about masturbation. And yes, definitely self-pleasure includes masturbation, it includes touching our genitals. But sometimes in order to create a healthy relationship to pleasure, we need to start somewhere simple. So we spent, in my tantric embodiment training, we have a module called sexual energy. And during the sexual energy module, we actually do a 63-day self-pleasure practice. And the purpose of that self-pleasure practice being to support people to connect much more deeply to their own bodies. And sometimes people struggle with genital practice, they struggle with feeling particularly sexual. But I'll have them come back to really, really simple practice of just light, simple touch on their forearm, light, simple touch on the upper arm, perhaps then moving to light and simple touch of their inner thighs. So the simplicity of touch, making it really simple without the expectation that it has to be sexual, I have to have an orgasm, I have to get somewhere. Stripping away the expectations, stripping away the layers, and coming back to the basics of just breathing and tuning into yourself can create a whole new world of magic and openness. And during the sexual energy module, when we do that self-pleasure challenge, I notice people's relationship to their body shift very significantly, and I'll speak to that a little bit more in a moment. Fergus says the distinction between the two dissolved at times. So beautiful when that happens. The gap between giving and receiving, just the two become one, and that's really gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that, Fergus. Greg says, wow, I've never done that to myself before, always with my partner, felt it through my whole body, through to my toes. Awesome, well done, Greg. I'm glad you had such a strong experience of it. Monica says, difficult to focus on the practice, but I noticed more calm in myself and my body as a whole. Fantastic. And that's the thing, it doesn't have to be the wow experience every time, but it's about training our mind, training our psyche, training our body to pay attention to the simplicity, to find the magic in the subtlety. Because when we tune in to that magic, when we tune in to that subtlety that's possible, then we start to notice more and more feeling becomes available to us. There's a sense of, you know how we talk about internet connection and how much bandwidth we have. So our relationship to our body, our connection to pleasure is the same. The more we tune into the subtleties, the more we tune into the sensitivity of our pleasure, we increase our internal bandwidth and we become much more available to feel a whole lot more. Hi Jade, lovely to see you on as well. I know you're deeply tuned into pleasure in your body. I think you might have just missed our pleasure practice, but yeah, have a few more things to share around pleasure before I move into questions this evening. So the other thing I was just saying about the 63-day self-pleasure challenge we do in the training, one of the really beautiful gifts I've seen in that is that, particularly for men, it's often a really strong way that men start to tune in to their own receptivity, sensitivity, and connection to pleasure. And I'll give you an example from when Rod was in the training and he and I were in the early stages of our relationship together. And when the self-pleasure challenge came about, I know Rod had this whole experience of a disconnection through his body. I know there'd be times when I would touch him, like I might touch his arm, I might touch his chest, and he just wouldn't feel anything. He talks about it as if there was an impatience in him and he was just waiting for me to get to the good bit, meaning he was waiting for me to touch his penis, because the touching his chest, the touching his arm, touching his legs, he just didn't really feel much of anything. And so during the self-pleasure practice, I gave a whole lot of different suggestions of tuning in to the way that you feel the water in the shower, or tuning into the way the sheets feel when you get into bed at night, and, you know, practicing through your own self-touch every day. And Fergus has just echoed what I've said with an absolutely. So I think that's an absolutely to connecting more deeply to sensitivity and feeling through that practice, because Fergus has done the training also. But what Rod noticed was the more he touched himself, and back then the self-pleasure challenge, I think, was a 42-day challenge. That's just recently, it's increased to 63. But what Rod noticed was that over the 42 days, with touching his own body and becoming more aware of his body each day, he started to increase his sensitivity, started to increase his connection to pleasure, so that then over time he was feeling more and more sensation. So it was no longer just that his penis was the good bit, his whole body became the good bit. His whole body became capable of feeling a lot of sensation and pleasure. My cat's playing with something that's noisy. I'm just going to take it off her. I'll just hide that till later so that you don't have to listen to crunch, crunch, crackle in the background. So yeah, Rod's just one of many men who I've seen have that transformation in the level of connection to their body and connection to pleasure. So nowadays when I touch Rod on the chest or on the arm or on his legs, he feels a lot of sensation, pleasure, receptivity and sensitivity. John says a hot spa bath is also another method that he's used. Yep, that can be a beautiful way to drop into pleasure and connection to the body. Jade says it's an important key for our beautiful men. Definitely, Jade. And yes, sadly, something that is often overlooked for men. So it's really beautiful when men start to feel that sensation of pleasure moving through the body. And the more deeply for men and for women, the more deeply we feel our own pleasure through our own personal practices, then the more when we touch and connect sexually with another person, then the more that pleasure becomes amplified through the connection with another person. You can probably see my naughty kitten in the background. She's just behind me, getting into mischief. I was thinking it was a lucky night she'd been so quiet, but yeah, it's clearly mischief time now. The other things that pleasure can do is can support your health in a lot of beautiful ways, because the more we tune in to pleasure, then the less stress is present in our bodies, the less stress hormones and chemicals are active, and then it can also support our immune systems to be healthy. It can support blood pressure and all sorts of things on a very physical body level by having a good relationship to pleasure. So if you want to be healthy, having a good connection to pleasure will also support the health of your body. The other thing I wanted to speak about, how our connection to pleasure helps you to know yourself. I remember many years ago when I first came to this Tantra journey, which would be, I guess, around 15, 16 years ago now. I remember being with a partner who said, "What do you like?" And I just remember at the time going, "I don't know what I like. How am I meant to know what I like?" There was this sense that me, like a lot of other people, and a lot of other women, had outsourced the responsibility for pleasure onto my partner. There was this expectation that you should just know what I like. You should just give me what I like. But I didn't know what I liked. So how could somebody else know what I liked? And so tuning into self-pleasure and being able to touch my own body, finding out that like, oh yeah, I really love the sides of my body being touched. I love my breasts being touched in a certain way, but not in other ways. There are types of touch on my vagina that cause me to really open and respond and feel good. And then there's other touch on my vagina that just causes me to contract and close down. So exploring what I like and what feels good in my self-pleasure also gives me the capacity to be able to communicate that to a partner, to be able to say what it is that feels good for me and what it is that I would like more of. And one of the things that can be a bit of a trick, I've worked with a lot of women around this, there can be a tendency for women to become quite critical and focus on telling their partner what they don't like. But when we are in that critical mindset of like, I don't like this, I don't like that, it can shut down the flow of energy with our partner. So focusing on like, oh, if you touch me like this, causes me to open. You know, I notice how much I expand when you hold my breast with your whole hand, or whatever your specific things are. You know, I really love my vulva to be caressed and stroked gently before you put your fingers inside of me. Being able to articulate what feels good to you and what supports you to expand will inspire your partner to give you more of the things that do feel good. So knowing ourselves gives us a language through which to communicate with our partners. And then also, when we have that internal connection to our partners, it means that, like if Rod walks in and touches me, I can breathe into his touch and feel my body respond and melt and open with his touch. Whereas if I'm disconnected from my body and he touches me, I can just be dismissive and brush his touch off. Whereas if I'm tuned in, there can be a sense of like, oh, yes, please, more of that. Or if the touch doesn't feel good, I can also let him know by being like, oh, that doesn't feel good, without getting into being critical or coaching him on what to do. I can just let my responsiveness, let my receptivity and my body communicate. Like, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's not good. See how there's so much that's communicated, but the words themselves are actually really simple. And that way we don't get into the territory of offending or upsetting our partners. The other practice that I commonly give to couples is to use a scale of 1 to 5 in touch practice. So let's say if you're wanting to work with your partner to explore what feels good, what doesn't feel good, you can set up this scale of 1 to 5. So if your partner says 1 means it doesn't feel good at all. 2 means it's okay but not great. 3 is like, oh yeah, that feels good. 4 is like, I'm enjoying that. And 5 is like, oh yes, please keep going. I'm loving that. So if you're taking it in turns, giving and receiving touch, and you can do this with a timer, you can set it up with a 15-minute timer. So you might give to your partner for 15 minutes and touch their whole body in a variety of different ways. And you might mix it up. Sometimes when I'm leading couples through this practice, I'll encourage them to be cheeky and maybe pinch or maybe, slap or do things that, are a little bit uncomfortable to make sure that your partner is comfortable in saying 1. But then if you're doing things that do feel really good, then hopefully your partner's saying 4s and 5s. And the good thing about the number system is that it's an objective and simple way to work. Instead of saying, I don't like that, I do like that, this is good, that's bad, saying 1 when something feels yuck and 5 when something feels amazing is a really simple way to communicate. It's objective, and it also means that you don't get triggered into taking offense to each other's feedback. So that's a really beautiful partner practice to do. And the more you're in touch with your pleasure, then the easier it is to tune into pleasure in another person. And the more then that the connection with another person becomes an amplification of shared pleasure. So I'm just going to have a little check of my notes, but I think I've covered everything that is on my list for today. It's been quite a long session today, so thank you for everybody who's been here for the duration. If you have any questions, I'm going to talk and waffle for a little bit while you can put any questions or any feedback. Feel free to drop something into the chat box. It's really lovely to have this forum to connect with all of you. And so I really would encourage everybody to incorporate connection to pleasure into your daily practice in some way, so that you start to take responsibility for knowing what pleasure is for you, for cultivating more sensitivity, for cultivating more receptivity, for starting to be more aware internally. So instead of waiting for what you think pleasure is, your body starts to have a whole new relationship to pleasure from the inside. And then you get to experience more and more pleasure in your own life, and that's supportive for you, for your health, for your emotional well-being, but it's also amazing for your relationship if you're with a partner. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for pleasure. So that's my summary from tonight. I'll still give you just a few more moments in case there are any questions, just because of the delay that we have on the Facebook Live. Susan says, thanks Martina, I love the 1 to 5 scoring system instead of words, feels like a fun, safe way. Yes, definitely a fun, safe way, and worth exploring. One of the things I often have to remind couples is to keep saying numbers intermittently, because sometimes the person receiving just goes into bliss and they're loving, loving, loving receiving, and then and so they're not giving any numbers. And so I have to be like, say a number, say a number. So if you are the person receiving and you're in bliss, be loud with your 4s and 5s so that your partner knows you're appreciating it. Okay. Well, it doesn't seem that there's any other questions tonight. So I'm going to say good night to all of you, and I hope that you all have fun exploring your relationship to pleasure. If there are any questions that come up after this or during the week, feel free to send me a private message and I'll address those questions at the beginning of next week's session. For anybody who is wanting to explore any of this in more detail, I am available for private sessions, and I'm doing those over Zoom, so it's all totally safe and very, very supportive. I've been working with people via Zoom for around about the last 8 years, and have some really effective results working with people in that format. I have a few comments coming in. Sherry says thank you. Beth says thanks Martina, the breath exercises just help to feel more. Thanks, this has been lovely. Fergus says lost. I'm not sure why Fergus is lost, but yeah, maybe send me a message then, Fergus, if you've missed something, or if I've missed something. So do pop any questions through to me and I will address those at the beginning of next week's session. Oh, Fergus doesn't know where lost came from. Okay, cool. Thank you, Susan. And yes, I will do polarity as next week's topic, because there's a lot that we can cover on polarity. And I would like to give it a full session of how you can be activating polarity in a conscious way during these times. And we might even do some masculine feminine practice during the session next week. So if you're single, you can tune in to your own masculine and feminine and even start to explore polarity inside of your own body during this particular time that we're living in. Okay, lovelies. Well, have a beautiful evening, and I'm going to go and find Rod and some dinner and my kitty cats and switch off. Good night.